Starting, okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to GMing for new players. We're here to talk about, I know what it says on the tin, how we can accommodate new players with, if you're running games for new players, or how to bring in new players into your games, and all the challenges that might come with that, and the tools you can use to help out with accommodating new players. Before we get started with anything, I feel we should do intros. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down the line here and then also maybe explain why we like GMing for new players. I feel like a lot of us here have GM'd a lot, but a new player group is always something completely different from your well-experienced group that you meet up with every week or something like that. So, hi, I'm Luis Loza. I'm a developer for Pathfinder at Paizo, working on the Pathfinder Lost Omens setting books and things like that. And I have my co-moderator here.
Hello, I'm Kate Baker. I'm a freelance RPG writer working for Paizo, Green Ronin, and other companies. What's really important to me about GMing for new players is that I feel like so often your very first game is kind of what makes or breaks, are you going to stick with the hobby. If that first game is terrible, a lot of people will just never try it again. So I consider it kind of a responsibility when you've got new players at your table to make sure that that first game is fun.
Hi, I'm Joseph Carriker. I'm a developer for Green Ronin Publishing. I am also a somewhat brand new novelist. I kind of have a really long, history of bringing new players into the game because, I love the game as much as I do, and and I think it kind of has a whole lot to offer a whole bunch of people, and kind of a nerd that way. So.
My name is Adam Davis. I'm a founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization Game to Grow. We run therapeutic social skills groups for kids. So we play a lot of D&D. We have 70 kids a week who come play Dungeons and Dragons in our groups. And one of the things that I love about playing with new players is that I personally believe that the world would be a better place if more people played games together, especially collaborative role-playing games. So what I love about playing with new players is we get to sort of welcome them into this hobby in a way that lets them not only build social skills in our groups, but also they then have a hobby that they can come participate in a community like there is here at OrcaCon.
Hi, my name is Tanya DePass. I am your programming and diversity coordinator for the convention. I also do a lot of freelance writing. I'm working currently with Green Ronin and Joe on the 5th season RPG based on N.K. Jemisin's series. I've done some work with Paizo and also other stuff with Green Ronin. And for me, I like bringing people in because two reasons. One, when I find other people of color that feel like the hobby is not for them, I can dispel that notion. And two, dispel the idea that you need a math degree to play any type of tabletop game, because people look at the shiny math rocks and the character sheet and go, no, this is not for me. And I'm like, come on, I have failed algebra twice. I can't do a lot of higher end math. If I can play this game, then you can play it too.
Okay, actually, I forgot to say why I like to bring players in. The real big thing for me is just that a lot of new players typically don't have a lot of preconceptions about how a game will run. So I don't have to have the most amazing game right away. A lot of times new players tend to make their own fun. Hey, can I do this? Sure, let's do it. Come on, let's have fun. And they tend to have more imagination. It feels like without knowing the rules, you can just kind of guess. Maybe I can do this, and kind of go with the flow with that, and that's pretty fun. Anyway, let's talk about stuff here.
So our first topic is, how do you pitch tabletop RPGs? How do you kind of figure out which of your friends might be players just waiting to happen, and how do you try to sell them on the idea of gaming?
So one of the things that I'm sort of within my kind of friend group, and I live down in Portland, I actually take a great deal of joy in finding and putting together queer groups, because it's interesting. I find that a lot of stereotypically, you often think of folks first getting involved in gaming kind of as teenagers. Well, with a lot of queer people, we were often very busy hiding kind of who we were at that time. And the reality is, role-playing, even on just a very basic, like, I killed that goblin sort of a level, there's a level of vulnerability that even if in practice it wouldn't have revealed anything, the threat of it doing so was much too. So honestly, the way I approach folks is I find those who have what I think of as gaming adjacent interests, right? Like, are they into the Marvel movies? Are they big Lord of the Rings nerds? This sort of thing. And then be like, hey, I've got room in this group. Are you interested? Have you ever been interested? And kind of, be willing to give that like very low level sort of pitch that is mostly like it's a collaborative thing, right? Like, we're basically telling a story together. There are some mechanics there that kind of serve to answer whenever we have a question whether or not something can happen, and that's really the only reason they're there. And then just kind of let it run from there.
I try to find out what people don't like about RPGs and then pitch the exact opposite. A friend of mine is a narrative-driven person. They really want to tell a story. They want to collaborate. And they keep finding people who just want to go be murder hobos. So that has turned them off of wanting to play. But if I can go, hey, these stories that we want to tell or things you like about, let's say, your favorite movie, your favorite book, like Joe said, what if you could sit at a table and just kind of spin that out? Would that be fun for you? Versus I go into a cave and I kill all these things and I take their gold, because frankly, that's boring. Yes, we like to kill things and have adventures, but I don't want to always go on a dungeon crawl every single time. Or find out, have you played RPGs? And if you did, what about it was interesting? What didn't you like? And kind of go from there and try to cater it to what someone would find interesting and let them kind of guide what it is they want out of the adventure.
So for me, most of my pitching is not to players themselves, it's to parents or teachers or therapists. So I have a little bit of a different kind of pitch. One of the first things I always have to tell parents or therapists is that there's no screens involved, that it's not a video game. Very common, the first thing that I have to say, they make the assumption, or it's not Magic the Gathering. Right. Or Pokemon. There's a lot of misconceptions. And here in Seattle, where we run most of our groups, there's not a lot of satanic panic left over, but I have to do a little bit of disincentivizing or under-highlighting the amount of combat that goes into the game when I'm talking about it. Oftentimes, the first thing that I'll say is this is a collaborative storytelling game where there's dice and random chance. And so we're building things like creative problem-solving skills, and we're working on frustration tolerance. And I start with the sort of outcomes that are associated with playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, or any role-playing game, really. And then once I get a little bit of the buy-in, then I can describe a little bit more of the details. But the first thing that I have to say is, no screens, we're working together, and there is some fantasy aspects, maybe some monsters, but it's like Lord of the Rings.
I feel like a lot of what I've encountered with new players, that is people who know about RPGs, have heard of D&D. Luckily it's a lot easier nowadays to explain what it is when I can just say, oh, that thing from Stranger Things, or Critical Role, which you've been listening to, you just haven't had a chance to play it, stuff like that. But a lot of people feel like they don't know enough or will never be as good as what they've seen already, so they don't ever want to take that dive. And I think what really helps a lot of people who are new players is just having someone that says, no, hey, I'm here to help you out. I'll hold your hand for as long as you like. I will take care of all the rules. I'll just tell you exactly what you need to roll, what numbers you need to look at, stuff like that, or make it as complicated or as simple as you like. And I think that helps a lot of people who are just on the fence about, I want to try it, I just don't think I can do it, or I don't want to take the time to read this textbook size book sometimes for some of these. And that tends to help in a lot of cases as well. So once you have players, though, there's a lot of setting expectations about what your game may or may not be. So how do you go about setting those expectations for new players, also setting expectations for what you would be as a GM? The typical thing that happens is you tell someone, hey, I'm going to run this game for you, and then they tell 10 of their friends, and suddenly everyone wants to join in. And what tools can you use to set up a safe environment for new players, that is encouraging for their imagination and the gameplay. So what tools do you have for that?
For me, a session zero, so people in the room, do you all know what a session zero is? Raise hands, speak. Okay, so I don't need to explain a session zero. But at that point, having that and being very clear in what's okay, what's not okay with you, any lines or veils would be where something, let's say, maybe gets a little more adult, where your cutoff is and what you're comfortable role playing. And, and also consider, are you streaming this content? Are you in someone's place? How well do you know these folks? In the X card, and I always can never remember who created the X card, but that's either a physical or a digital card where you can say, I'm not okay with this, and then the DM can back off and say, rewind, that didn't happen, and make sure that players are comfortable, because you may hit on a trigger, and I mean that in the very clinical sense. I do not mean in the little triggered way. Please do not make that joke. It is not funny. Because you never know what could set someone off or what could be a moment for someone. And even if you've discussed this, something could come up in the campaign or something you say without meaning to do so. And also communicating. That is the biggest tool a GM can have. Not just at the table, not just a couple hours before you play, but checking in when you take a break. And please take breaks. Please get water and stretch and eat during your game, unless it's streamed, and that's a whole other thing. But communicating before, during, and after, and not just when you're about to play the game. Slack, tweet, whatever means works for you.
And I think that whether it's lines and veils or an X card, having a mid-game interrupt is especially important with new players who, even during your session zero, may not know what to expect in a game or what kinds of things could come up. I run a lot of public games at cons and at stores and things. The number one issue I have seen at the table is arachnophobia. There's a lot of people where if a spider mini comes out, they're gonna be in a bad place. And if you've been playing RPGs a long time, you might know, hey, there's a lot of spiders in like low-level adventures. You're a brand new player, you've never seen The Hobbit or read it, you may not be expecting that that's likely to happen. So it's things that experienced players might know to bring up in a session zero that new players may just not have any idea.
I find it can be useful to maybe actually be willing to quote unquote spoil more of what you intend to run when you're dealing with new people, right? Like, when you've got a typical group already put together and whatnot, you want to kind of keep, some behind the screen for the surprise. But when you're dealing with new folks who are like, I don't even know what to expect, what this is going to look like, being willing to say, right, this is kind of the setup, right? This is why your character is there at all. And honestly, being willing to keep it very, very simple, maybe even simpler than you think it needs to be, because a lot of the play, a lot of the fun is going to be that person kind of running around the game, running around the world, poking at things with their character, saying what their character can do, what the world can support, and like being willing to make room in your planning for someone to do that, I think is really important.
So I want to build on that. I really agree with all that. I think that there's, and really everything that's been said so far as session zero, we definitely do a lot of that, but I'm dealing with mostly adolescents where we can't explain the rules before we start playing, because just the amount of endurance for sitting and listening to something is pretty low. So we have to sort of explain the rules as we go, starting to play as quickly as possible. So I would say one of the best tools that I use for new players is pre-made character sheets. So we can just get started right away, and then sort of newer video games have this great way of teaching the rules as you play. Older video games, you had to have the manual to learn what the buttons did, and they just sort of threw you in. New video games, you can start the game, and then it's like use the right stick to look around. Use this button to interact with objects, and then you always have that little bit of tutorial dungeon before it dumps you into the world to go exploring. So that is what I use most of the time, is like a tutorial dungeon where the first thing is an NPC, and then I play the NPC, and then now they understand how NPCs work, and then the NPC is attacked, and here's how combat works, and then they have to go find something. Now I'll teach you how some of the other D20 rolls work in a game like D&D. So I think teaching the rules as you go can be really valuable. And then one of the other things that I think is really, really useful at Technique is I will fold my Game Master screen down as an indication that we're pausing. So my Game Master screen is up, I'm the characters, and we're having conversations in character. And then I fold it down and I say, okay, so let me teach you how this works. So I'm the one that actually explains what happens in the game. I explain what the NPCs do, because a lot of new players who come to us are like, and then the dragon says, there you are, cousin. And I've said, no, sorry, I should have explained better. That's my job. I get to say what the dragon says. You get to decide what your character does. And we have to do that when playing with new characters or new players, because they don't know what those rules are, so it's important that we indicate very clearly what those rules are while we're teaching as we go.
One other thing in particular that can be really important to have everyone aligned on before the game starts, even if it's a short one-shot or several session campaign, and this may depend on system, but whether or not death is on the line. You might be running a horror type game where, like, look, most of you are not going to survive this. You might be playing a D&D game and death is in the character rules, or in the system rules. But maybe you feel like with your brand new players, that might be kind of upsetting if the character they've grown to like over these couple of sessions just dies. That's a thing to think about, and it is a thing to make clear if, hey, your character could permanently die is part of your game. That's not, good or bad necessarily, whichever way you want to run it, but it is a good thing to make sure everybody's on the same page about, and that new players do understand if their character could permanently die, that's something that could happen.
To build on that, if I can really quickly, one of the things that I found works really well is using pre-generated characters, but then after we've got like a session or so in, letting people know, like, look, if you don't want to continue, if you would like the opportunity to kind of make your own character, like, we can totally phase this out, and we can, you can send them in to die bravely or whatever, however the kind of game wants to run, to give people this sort of understanding that, like, once you make that one character, that's not it. Like, you potentially have the opportunity to bring in others, and it kind of helps highlight the notion that characters are sort of a cast, and that cast can rotate out, and the story still continues.
I will also explain to new players that I'm a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I'll say, it's a lot like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the kids look at me like I'm 90 years old. But I'll say, it's a like, or maybe The Flash, or, some more relevant show to them. But the question in those shows is never, maybe season 5, spoiler alert, but we're never worried that Buffy's gonna die. We're always wondering, now we're not saying, will she get out of this? We're saying, how will she get out of this? And that's the way that our stories most often go. If somebody clubs Buffy over the head and the screen turns to black, nobody's like, oh no, she's dead. They're like, oh no, she was kidnapped. And that's really the way that we, I explain very clearly, if we have a TPK, we'll either reset because that was my bad as a game master, or we will wake up in some strange place and have the story continue. We're a story-based game. And if the players want that sort of level of cruel world where their characters can die in a moment, then we have that conversation during session 0. Like, do you want your characters to, if they make it to level 3, do you want that to be like a glorified moment of heroism, or is that just a natural progression of the story, right?
All right, so that brings us into actually running the game. So you're at the table, you've got new players. What are your tips for making it fun, for making it easy to learn, for just making it a good time?
Cheat sheets for rules. No, seriously, because I played D&D from first edition, and that's when the rules were like really, really ridiculously hard. You really did feel like you needed a math degree to roll a character. But just simple things like, oh, you're playing a rogue, here's like a cheat sheet of kind of what you can do as a rogue. At first level, here are things you can do. So they've got like a one-page reference if you're not using something online. And also reminding players that neither you nor them need to memorize every single rule in the player's handbook, because if anyone does know literally every rule in the player's handbook, I need to know what memorization techniques you use. But these books are there as a guide. They are not written in stone. No, like Jeremy Crawford's not going to show up behind you and take away your player's handbook if you don't literally know everything. And that it's supposed to be fun. I know a lot of people feel various ways about how they want to play pick system, but at the end of the day, I just want to have fun, whether I'm the DM, whether I'm the player.
I think I have a lot of experience with running more crunchy, complicated games like Pathfinder and D&D. So a lot of what I like to do is kind of strip a lot of the extra complicated portions of the game away for newer players. If you're just starting, you don't need to know about opportunity attacks and all the combat maneuvers and all the little tiny nuances about concentrating on your magic spell and all that. It's a lot easier to just say, you get attacked and here's what happens and you move away, and all the basics to let people have the understanding of the foundation of the game. Knowing those basics, from then on they can then you can then introduce, kind of like you said, in a tutorial kind of style, where suddenly, oh, well, these are tough warriors and they know how to attack people as they move away, and now you've introduced the attacks of opportunity a little later down the line when they now have a feel of general combat. And just piecing in little by little as you feel that your table is picking up on it, I think helps a lot. And the other thing I like to do is just, as I mentioned earlier, kind of lean into whatever the players are doing. Because they don't know all the rules, they might start trying to do kind of out there stuff, and encouraging that creativity is always going to lead to a better time, I feel, for most everyone at the table than saying, no, you can't do that, actually the rule says X, Y, Z. Using that yes and or yes but rule for most of that is typically the way I like to go with, because then later, if you want, you can say, okay, well, actually the rule says this, but let's go with it. Or even a few sessions down the line, say, well, actually we're going to bring the real rule back in for that. Or just have fun with it, and suddenly everyone can swing from chandeliers and also stab you and cast a spell at the same time. And that's just the kind of game you have all of a sudden.
I think just to build on what Tanya said around playing, making sure you're playing, I think is the most important thing, to remember why you're there in the first place. So there's a mantra that I always encourage game masters to use, which is, it's our game. And if you can say that to yourself, it's not your game, it's not the game master's game, it's our game, it's everyone who's sitting at the table. It's not our game, we don't have any say how you play your game, it's your game, your table's game. So if you can keep that in mind, then I think that's what you need to do. Ignore the rules if you don't find them useful. Who cares how spell slots work? They want to cast a fireball. If it serves the story and the enthusiasm of a group of people sitting around in person having a good time, have a fireball happen. Who cares? Make sure you have a good time. There was a post on the Dungeons and Dragons Facebook group where someone was like, are there LGBTQ groups in Waterdeep? Or clubs in Waterdeep. And it's like, who cares what's in the book? It's your game, of course there is.
Right.
It's your Waterdeep. Put whatever you want to in there. And that's the thing that I would always encourage people to do, is make sure you're using the rules and using the game to serve your group, whatever that is, whether that's simplicity or even extra crunchiness. We have players who, we most of the time ignore spell components and ignore ammunition because it doesn't serve our kids to be punished for forgetting how many
logistics.
Yeah, the logistics that don't serve them. So we ignore a lot of those rules. But for some people, they really love the crunchiness. They want to go find wherever that spider leg is so they can have a material component. That's the thing that they want to do. So I care about that for that one player and not for anybody else. And it's because it's our game.
Yeah, I think being willing to start with sort of, as multiple people have mentioned, a sort of stripped down version. And then introduce things as you go, and not just not just introduce it telling them what the new rule is, but set up a scenario so that, like, if you want to teach them about opportunity attacks, as the established example, give them a scenario where whatever they're facing gives them lots of opportunities to take opportunity attacks, right? And like they will very quickly catch on, oh, when that figure moves away from mine and they're not being careful about it, I can and then, because players learn best when they're invested, and most people are sitting at that table to kind of be cool, right? Like, we want to play a cool game. We want to have cool characters, however we're defining that, right? And that's a different definition for everybody. But give players the opportunity to shine with those new mechanics, and they'll latch onto them way faster.
I think, especially what Adam was touching on, brings up, especially if perhaps you're running a more narrative game, how do you get players to start to, new players who maybe don't know how these things work or what a collaborative storytelling game even means, how do you get them to buy in and start coming up with their own ideas?
Like everyone just looked at me. For me, so I'm actually going to be DMing a Dragon Age short run on someone's Twitch channel. And, you know, for those of us that know the lore and we're big nerds, or also, and this may seem strange to some people, but I also kind of point to fan fiction. Because if you write fan fiction, that shows that you can go play in someone else's sandbox. And, you know, for something where it's a beloved franchise or someone's really invested in maybe that one minor character, we were joking about the one chair players get obsessed with, or the one thing where you have written no backstory for this NPC, they're just standing in a corner, and of course that's the NPC that everyone wants to talk to. I asked them, like, you know, what I try to do is give them a place where maybe you've stopped at a tavern, you're camping on the road, and this is a point which, in actual life, you'd probably sit and talk to the people around you. And so there's a chance to, like, talk. Maybe you just survived a big battle, maybe you just had a big plot point dropped on your head, and it's a chance to sit and talk. Or, weirdly enough, sending my character shopping has often turned into, like, 2 hours. It's like, you really want to spend 2 hours wandering around the Wandering Emporium. Because I ran a game for patrons, and they're like, can we go to the Wandering Emporium shop? And I'm like, sure. And then it turned into, can I get a hellhound puppy? And they literally spent 2 hours trying to figure out how they could come away with this with both an abyssal chicken familiar and a puppy.
We also really needed that infernal boba tea.
Yes, you needed the boba tea. That's right. Because it was about 2 hours of being in the Wandering Emporium, and Kate was in that game, and it was just like, yes, here, you have your chicken. You have your chicken. But it was a fun thing, and you got to talk and chat and have fun and also fight abyssal chickens.
I imagine those are all in the rule books, right?
No, not at all. Well, the abyssal chickens exist. I made an abyssal goose for them to fight.
That's awesome.
I think another way you can get people invested is, I mean, use the mechanics to your advantage. When players are kind of timid about what can I do with this character or whatever, if your enemy is suddenly doing this cool stuff that you know the players can do, suddenly they are also like, wait, hold on. They can do that. I want to try to do that as well. And one thing I found that works really well, in addition to that, is just creating moments to put the spotlight on specific players. If you're fighting, you know, the skeleton warrior, and the one that can do best against it is the cleric that can channel energy and destroy it with, you know, the holy power that emanates from it. Let them know that, and then suddenly when they're the ones that can destroy the skeleton and everyone else is having a hard time with, you know, because it's made of bone and it's hard to break it and all that stuff, they feel cool. And when there's a point where everyone can be the person that kind of wins the day or wins the combat, it makes them like what they did a lot more than just, oh, you happen to be the one that did the thing where it's weak against fire or whatever. No, if you kind of encourage that and push it forward, and suddenly they're thrust into that spotlight a little bit, you know, then that always helps reinforce that, hey, I'm cool too, idea that a lot of these games try to put forth.
One thing I imagine you see a lot with young players that I see with, like, running demos, I always really like to let the players have agency as much as possible, and especially with brand new players who may not understand the rules enough to make those kinds of decisions. If they pick a very silly name for their character or an obvious reference to a cartoon or something, or when they pick out a mini, like, I want to be that frog instead of like a fighter, let them do it. You know, call them by that silly name, let them use whatever mini they want. Letting them have whatever control over their character they can helps them feel more invested?
One thing that we see a lot with brand new players is that not everybody is ready to jump in and do roleplay or make up their backstory. So one of the tricks that we use a lot is offering either an open-ended question or a closed, like limited choice question. So if I was to say something like, tell me about your character's backstory, some players are really excited about sharing everything they've made up, and some would freeze, and then an anxiety response happened, and then you've lost your, enthusiasm for the game. So one thing that I could say is your character from a big city or a small town? Did someone give you that weapon that you have, or did you buy it? So then the players are making just a choice between two things, and then they will start adding more information to that. And I can say, oh, someone gave it to you? Was it a relative? And then there's a yes or no response, and then, oh, who was it? And now it's like, oh, my uncle gave it to me.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things are a nice way to warm people up to role-playing and making stuff up. You can also do that fully as an NPC. So you don't have to be the game master doing that. That can happen in real time. They go to that tavern, and then the barkeep goes, that's a cool sword. Where'd you get it? Did someone give it to you? And then they get to do all that. They can answer using their own affect. They don't have to be in character, but they say yes or no, or it was my uncle or my character's uncle. And then you can also sort of navigate and assess what comfort level that player has and how willing they are, and when you might need to pump the brakes a little bit if they're really excited about going off on a rail about their uncle and how their uncle's killed a dragon and this weapon is made of dragon skins. Who knows, right? So you're getting a lot of information when you're doing that kind of stuff too around what your players need, because knowing your players is really what it's all about ultimately, is figuring out how to assess their comfort level and then meet them where they are to make them feel safe and empowered to participate.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to our next subject. So it's the digital age. What a wonderful time we live in now. And a lot of people are playing games online. I know I've actually continually ran a game for many years that has since converted into an online game because I've moved out here to Seattle. And a lot of new players are starting their first games online through play-by-posts or through virtual tabletop, things like that, and just trying to see if there's any tips for running games for new players digitally that you might have, or if you happen to be streaming a game, what challenges that also comes with, and how you can try to accommodate new players who might not even be used to being on a camera or trying to just talk at their computer screen as opposed to sitting at a table. So, yeah.
I like how everyone also just looked at me. Well, because I'm a terrible person for when I was doing introductions, I'm on an actual play show that is a Wizards of the Coast show. It's called Ravels Waterdeep. We're on Sundays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon my time zone. And we are a stream show, but we are also sitting at a table together. It's not all virtual. So what you have to get people to remember is that there's more performance involved when you're streaming, or even when you're doing kind of a video, Roll20, maybe Zoom or Discord or other tools where you're still looking at each other, but you don't have the same, I can't, like, we're all at a table right now. I can look at Kate, I can look at everyone here and see facial expressions a lot easier. And even with Zoom or something like that, you can see people, but you don't see the whole body. Tone may or may not convey depending on what's going on. So when you are streaming for an audience, however, I can't stop and like flip through my player's handbook. There are things that will just kind of drag the session down, and you usually have a finite time. So you have to think about, you're more performative, you have to be a little bit more on the fly. So honestly, for a brand new player, and this is weird because half of our cast was brand new players when we started Ravels of Waterdeep, but they also had performance experience, is thinking about people are watching you because they want to be entertained. As much fun as it might be to get really into your dice rolls and have a camera over your dice, that is boring. I'm just going to tell you that now. I want to see the people, I want to see the story, I want to see the engagement. So someone as a DM, especially if you have new or newer players, is remind them people are there to watch us. They want to get to know our characters. And yes, there'll be combat, but describe the combat. A thing we do is we rotate GMs every season. And when we have things, or like if you manage to kill something and you get that final strike, how does that look? What is it like? We to my chagrin or dismay, sometimes we get a little heavy with the pop culture references. But well, my character did Thunder Smite, and it looked like I was pulling down Thor's hammer on this. And so you're being descriptive, you're giving people a way to kind of see your excitement, but you're also of having that heroic moment and explaining that to people. And whether someone's listening to the podcast, whether they're watching you live, or even just kind of watching you on Twitch and a VOD later, they can still see you getting into it. And that's what I think draws a lot of people in, because you can see the power of storytelling. Not so much we crawled through this dungeon for 4 hours, I killed many goblins, and I got 5 gold. Because that's also boring. You want to see that someone's invested in not just their character, but the setting, and they're really into what the DM and the other people are doing, and there can be very powerful moments between you at a table. And sometimes you can forget people are watching you. Because we can't see the stream when we're on, we can see the chat, but we don't see the actual video. So remembering people are watching you, but also kind of really getting into the game, which sounds weird. But as you play and as you get more comfortable with your character and your DM and the story that's being spun, it's very easy to forget that there's a camera on you or that people may listen to you later. Just enjoy the game for what it is.
I really struggle sometimes with online games being a player. So I'm in a live play Twitch game called Clinical Role, where it's all therapists or therapy adjacent professionals who are playing in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And now we have 3 people in a room, and then our game master is remote, and then 2 of our players are remote. So we have a screen set up in front of us with a camera on it where we can see the other players, and that's been really helpful to have those people in front of us. But also the fact that I'm in a room with some other real people really keeps me engaged. When I was, we tried it for a while where everyone had their own screens. Even if we were in the same room, we were all looking at cameras. And I had a really hard time with that because I had notifications that would pop up that would say, you have, your bills due, or whatever the case is. And then I'm playing a game of D&D, people are watching, and I'm like, oh no, I have to pay my electricity bill, or whatever it is. So it's really hard to stay engaged. So the advice that I would give is turn off your notifications if you're gonna be on a screen. Make sure that you don't have other things that are gonna be interrupting your space because people are hopefully watching. And your goal is to be as invested as you can be in that game. And if there's other things coming across into your ecosystem, that's going to hamper your performative capacity, but also just make it a lot less fun. I didn't want to hear about my bills when I was trying to be Gragnall, the dwarf barbarian. The other thing that I would say is that we participated in a documentary where people came to film our kids playing a game of D&D, and they do not have performance backgrounds, but they have performance aspirations. So they don't have experience as much as they have a strong desire to be in the spotlight. And so when you have seasoned performers, they know how to sort of give and take the spotlight, ideally. And my players did not. And so I had to be very, and I didn't want to do this on camera also, necessarily, but it might be a useful thing to say, your character shouldn't always be the first one that speaks to the NPC. There may be a time that your character stands in the background and doesn't interact with every social encounter, doesn't always be the first one to attack. Find a reason why your character isn't the first one to do that. A character-based reason, if possible, but find a reason so that everyone can have an opportunity to shine. That's a useful thing in any game, but especially when there's streamers.
Well, and the other thing too is make a decision as a DM. So obviously this won't count if you're using something electronic like D&D Beyond, but are you going to allow phones, not allow phones? Because some people need a phone, and they may need to do something where they can, if they're not in the scene, they need to either look up a rule or they need to focus in some way. And for some people, it is a very necessary thing. For other people, it is a distraction. Are you going to allow chat to be a thing that your players see and respond to? Because we have a large monitor where we can see the chat, but we don't necessarily respond to it, either real time. Our show is only 2 hours, so we don't even take a break. So if you're not using electronic means for your character sheets, things like that, have a hard and fast rule of yes, phones, iPad, whatever, or no, or you can't be on social media. Like obviously if you are playing and then I see tweets from you at the same time the game is going on, either I'm not invested or find out what's going on, because maybe they're just checked out when they're not part of the scene. And keep notifications off, etc., because if you're doing a virtual game and everyone's virtual, that could pop up. You never know, and you may not want people knowing you owe your electric bill.
Right.
But
I wasn't screen sharing, at least.
Oh, I know. But it can be a cause distraction, especially if you're a newer player, because you're focusing on the rules. You're trying to make sure that you're playing quote unquote right and being engaging. So but that should be part of your session 0 to go back to that of, are you going to use your phone for your character sheet? Are you going to use an iPad? How are you managing your things if we already stream game? And if you do take a break, do you care if people respond in the chat? Because that can be distracting too. Because people will also backseat you. They will backseat literally anything on Twitch. I found this out streaming The Sims and playing chess. People backseated me playing chess. So, especially if you are doing D&D or another game, people who've been playing forever will find a way to go, that's not the right way to play, ignore them. And also have rules, have moderators. You should not have to worry about the chat while you are DMing or playing on a stream game.
I haven't done any streaming, but I have done, other online games, Roll20 or even just voice chat. I think one thing that's important with new players is to make sure that you're not adding a bunch of technical stuff to learn on top of learning this game. A lot of those tools that are out there, Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, can do all kinds of cool stuff, and you don't need to do all of that right away. You can have things be theater of the mind, that's just easier to describe. You can play with, on an online game, still using a physical character sheet and actual dice, if using an online dice roller is just one step too many while you're a brand new player. And then I think one thing that's extra important in games like that, we did talk about some of these safety tools earlier. In a face-to-face game, you can see people's faces. You can kind of tell, hey, that person's looking a little withdrawn or uncomfortable, I can check in with them. You're not going to get that kind of feedback in a virtual game. You might have a very small image of their face or even just voice only. And I think it gets more important to do those check-ins like Tanya was talking about earlier, that, is everybody cool with this? Is everybody comfortable? When you take a break, it's something where you have to be a little bit more proactive about it as the GM, just because you're getting less of that feedback that you would in a face-to-face game.
Just to build on that, our game master for Clinical Role, Megan Connell, did a check-in before the game started and said, hey, today some things might get a little bit emotional, so I'm going to show you how to do the whisper feature on Roll20. And that was really important. I don't really pay attention unless I'm told to pay attention sometimes. So it was really useful that was the setup. It was sort of like showing your hand a little bit. Some of your character's friends might be in deep peril. So I want to give you the tool to give me a direct message that says this is too much, this is the X card equivalent, right, where it can also just be between you and the game master, so that you don't have to tell everyone else at the table that comment that character made hurt my feelings personally, but now I can say /W, and I have actually accidentally typed the wrong thing and let everybody know anyway. So, here's to radical vulnerability. But it's a really useful tool, and I think that's creating that space where you can have that feedback is really important too. I think that there's something about asking for feedback all the time from your players, so that it's not like not necessarily, hey, today was rough, can I have some feedback? How about today was great, today was whatever it was, doesn't matter. At the end of every session, you can do like a post-mortem, like in the theater world, where you just say, give me some feedback. What was a highlight? What was a challenge? What is something you're looking forward to? Whatever those things are, making feedback a normal part of your experience and your process means that it's normal to tell you, I didn't like the way you did that, or I love the way that you did that. It's not only when things are great or bad that you provide an opportunity for someone. So the comfort level of providing feedback, even to players, to each other, is really useful.
I actually make a point of touching base with at least one or two of my players in between games, just to be like, hey, checking in, like, how are you liking your character? Are there any like plot things that you would like to see come up? Like, you wrote at this background, what parts of that would you like to see crop up in the game? Check in with people to see, is this the kind of fun you're having? Are there other types of play you would prefer, right? Is there too much combat? Would you like more puzzle solving? Would you like, that sort of thing. And that way, and obviously everyone's going to have different tastes, but making a point to check in with people so that they can have that opportunity, particularly outside of, because there are a lot of people who won't speak up if it's everybody at the table, because they don't want that singular spotlight, especially if they have a criticism to offer. So like making sure your players know that you care what they individually think of the game that you have been running and their experience goes a long way towards helping to teach people to be willing to offer that up.
And one thing that I use it anyway because I stream, but Discord or Slack, and I know a lot of people don't like Slack, but Discord can be a way, especially if it's going to be a persistent campaign or an ongoing campaign where maybe you plan it for a few months and then it goes into a few years, where you can have constant communication or have a way, at least as the DM, to be reachable. Because like Joe said, some people are not going to speak up at the table. But if someone pulls down an X card or something like that, you should be okay as a DM going, okay, maybe we need to take 5 minutes to stretch, to get water. Because if someone is uncomfortable enough to use that X card, maybe give them a break. And don't like make a big deal, oh, this person threw down the X card, we're stopping right now. It's like, this could be a good opportunity to get some water, get a snack. Obviously it's a little more difficult if you're streaming or doing recording a podcast or something. But you can also hit pause and come back to it later if you're at least recording audio. But for a stream, if you normally take a break, maybe that can just be your excuse to take a break in that moment and give people a couple minutes. Because the worst thing that could happen is someone either comes across the line, a veil isn't honored, or they put down the X card, and nothing has changed because, oh, we're streaming, we can't stop live. Yes, you can. It may break the flow of things, but I'd rather have a player feel safe at the table over anything else. I don't care if you're live streaming for around 20,000 people. Yes. Let them be safe, take a quick break, and come back to it. And if they need to step away for a few minutes, that is totally okay.
And maybe people are worried about it being sort of a little of here's how the sausage is being made for the game, but I actually think it's really great when you see people using safety tools and modeling that and showing how to use it, that other people know, oh, this is an okay thing for my game.
Yeah, like when we were doing the Patreon games, kind of checking and going, is this okay? Like, this may be a little bit much, because, granted, it was me and 3 other people, but still, that is 3 people who have put their trust in me as a GM to run them through this adventure. And I think that's something we haven't quite touched on yet, is that people are trusting in you to give them a fun time, a good time, and there's a lot of emotional things that can come up during play that you may not even think about, or it may hit you out of the blue. So I think realizing the trust people are giving you by sitting at the table with you is a thing that you need to both think about and honor and trust and give your players that in return.
So the conversation has kind of naturally gone on to our next topic, which is after the game. Following up with players, and especially, what do you do if that game was not the best? If you can tell that they didn't have a fun time, how do you talk them into giving it another shot, or to continue that trust in you to keep going?
Honestly, I think that at that point, the person running the game being willing to model a sort of, a creative vulnerability and say, like, wow, that was definitely not the best game I've ever run. What are some ways, that you think, that could have gone better, so that I can take that and, work on those. Because, these are all skills, right? The one thing, the panels like this wouldn't exist for a very long time in the gaming industry. The assumption was, well, some people are DMs, and just some people are not. And that's not true. These are all teachable skills. There are some of these that some people just that come more naturally to some people than others, totally. But these are all teachable skills. And it's all teachable by modeling, right? And so as a GM, being willing to say, ooh, here's a peek behind the curtain, right? Here's my craft when it wasn't at its best. How would you improve that? And then being willing to take that is extremely empowering to your players.
I do checkout questions at the end of every session. So literally, I have had kids that I've been playing with for years, and they know that after every single weekly session, I ask them 3 questions, and they're expected to answer all 3 questions. We pass around a talking object, and everybody answers the same questions every single session, and it is part of our ritual that nobody can object to, because it's just the way things are done. And every player gives a spotlight to someone else sitting at the table. So this is not I loved the moment where this thing happened. This is, I liked how you did this thing, And that can apply both to in-character stuff or just like, I really liked how I coughed and you handed me a cough drop. Whatever that is, that's just about sharing the communal space together. And I'm dealing with social skills development, so it's really about sharing and receiving positive feedback. But then the second question that we ask everybody is, what is something that was challenging or something you learned today? The learned today is really, that's because we're working in social skills, but what is something that was challenging today is open-ended. That is, I was challenged because I got lots of low rolls and it put me in a bad mood. That's good feedback for the game master. Your response to the game today was because your character didn't do as much as you wanted them to do. But also, I've had players say that combat went on way too long. And I was really frustrated because I really wanted to move the story along. Or that NPC that you loved playing, I didn't like very much. He was annoying. I do a lot of annoying character voices. I have a theater background. I love annoying character voices. Not all the kids do. So that making that space really clear where I can then receive that feedback, and I'm modeling both because I have kids who need to see this, but also because the world needs to see people receive critical feedback. I think that's an important part of the experience there. They can also give each other feedback there too, that I didn't like how you spoke, I mean, that's not really you. I didn't like how you talked over me every time my character wanted to talk to the NPC. I wanted to buy a sword and you kept talking about your uncle. Whatever the case is.
To be fair, that does sound like me.
And then the third question we ask every single person, every single session is, what is something you're looking forward to or something you are predicting? And most of the time, that is so I can steal those ideas and put it into the game and make them feel like geniuses. So that's just another GM trick. But because the new players, bringing it back to the theme of the panel, new players want to see this interesting and exciting things happen. So if they are like, I'm looking forward to going back to the shop where we can spend 2 hours. Cool, plan for that. Don't spend your planning time making cool mountain trekking adventures. Put in more chickens.
Abyssal chicken.
Right, yes, abyssal chickens.
And by the way, this has nothing to do with the panel. Who's seen what an abyssal chicken looks like?
They're great.
Oh my God, go Google a picture of an abyssal chicken. You're welcome. Because it's not going to be what you expect. I can guarantee it. But to actually answer the question, I try to just chat with people because you can tell when someone wasn't feeling the game session. It's like, well, what happened? Was there something you really wanted to do and we didn't get to it because we were off herding abyssal chickens and hellhound puppies? Or, your character might have fallen off a cliff, oops, you tripped, you didn't make your charisma or whatever roll. Are you okay with that? I wouldn't actually kill a player for that, by the way, if you're clumsy. What is it that you didn't get to do? Because usually I've found when people are not thrilled or happy with something because it didn't go the way they either expected or the way they wanted, or they wanted to have that I'm the big hero moment, and for whatever reason in that session it didn't happen, so they're just not real thrilled with it. And try to incorporate that in the next session. I'm like, well, thanks for telling me. Next time we meet, I'll try to make sure that your character gets to do more, or because you can't guarantee a hero moment because dice do what the dice want to do, but you can at least try to give them something to do where they don't feel like they're kind of background or they're a prop or whatever. Because again, we all do this because we want to be the big hero on occasion.
Well, I will say one of the things, since we're talking about what players want to see, as a GM, your best tool to know what your players want to see is the choices that they make on their character sheets, right? Anytime they're done creating their character, looking at their list of skills or whatever, tells you the kind of actions that they want to be taking in those stories. So if you have 4 character sheets handed over to you, right, and you've got folks who have, a couple of them have some stealth and a couple of them have some investigation and maybe there's some streetwise going on and all the rest of this, that is their way of telling you what type of game they want to play. So ever so often, pick up the sheets, look at what a lot of the focus has been put into, because that's them telling you the stories that they want to play.
Especially animal handling.
Yeah.
Yes.
You gotta come up with stuff for
It's true.
Every group loves pets.
I can guarantee there's going to be one player that's like, but it's so cute. I know it's a monster. Can we keep it?
Can I take
And then they'll roll a 20 on animal handling.
Roll animal handling.
Once they give it a name, you can't make them kill it.
Cinnamon lives with Kate's character.
I think another thing that might be helpful after the game is to realize that maybe the game that they just played isn't necessarily the game that they will like the best. I mean, there are so many RPGs out there at this point, and so many things that are, on the more narrative storytelling end, and the crunchier math finder style stuff, where it varies. Sometimes you can set expectations at the beginning or before a session and say, here's the kind of game we're going to play. But then at the end of it, even with those expectations in mind, the players might suddenly realize that's not what I thought it was going to be. When you tell me it's a high fantasy game and I'm going to be playing Lord of the Rings, but I had expected to be playing Skyrim as opposed to Lord of the Rings. You don't know that's what the player was going in, even with those expectations set. So at the end of the session, or whatever the time frame is, if it's a couple of sessions or a whole campaign even, just asking those players, hey, what were you kind of looking for in this game? Or, noticing what they latched onto or what their characters were kind of designed for, lets you kind of maybe either change the story next time to kind of accommodate that, or in some situations where if you realize that the entire table was really into the spooky house section, maybe you switch over to a more horror-themed game that is better fitting for those kinds of stories, or something that is just kind of, more narrative. Instead of playing D&D, you're playing Dungeon World, where it's a lot easier to just kind of on the fly do that kind of stuff. And I think realizing that you might have to just not necessarily play the game that you intended to in the first place, but not necessarily giving up your own fun as a GM, but knowing that I think the whole table will have more fun if we switch from D&D to something else. It's probably also an important tool in your kit where you can switch gears as needed.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that where I have a friend who joined our D&D game once and really just did not get into it, didn't like it. Later we played a Dread game that he sat in on and loved it. There's no character sheet, there's no dice, it's just the Jenga tower and the atmosphere being created. It feels like a horror movie, and it's exciting, and there's never a dull moment. And yeah, absolutely, a different game, maybe what that person is going to enjoy.
My wife is not historically a role-playing gamer. She's done awesome, enjoying it through me largely. We played through with a weekly D&D game that she enjoyed. She was fine, and then we did a one-shot that was a Christmas-themed one-shot, and it was like the stakes being lower all of a sudden because we know this is a one-shot. It was a backstory one-shot, so we know we all survive. And watching her just lean into talking to Tiny Tom in this Christmas-themed one-shot, she came alive with a totally random NPC moment, and the game master was awesome, and just Tiny Tom was like, "Can I come join you on your quest?" And the little one-shot adventure, Tiny Tom wasn't even in there, but now we have this little Tiny Tom holding on to another character's back the entire time, quipping along, and then the mission was killing Santa Claus. But it was a complicated storyline involving finding out. No. You were hired by an evil toy company to kill Santa Claus, and so then we decided to fake Santa Claus's death to still get the money from the toy company. It was but it was the true
holiday spirit.
That was the game. That was the game that got my wife to really get excited about it, right? Yeah. And that's just what we're saying, finding the right game. And for her, it was I want no stakes. I want something that, right? And something that's so absurd that we can all just
wow.
We're not taking it seriously. Some evil toy and tobacco company.
Right, of course.
Hired us to kill Santa Claus, and of course we were sure, we'll do that, knowing that we're gonna try to undermine this evil toy company or whatever, because Santa Claus giving away free toys undercuts the profit of this toy company. It was very overt that we were gonna be backstabbing the toy company. But anyway, that's just bringing it back to that's the game that really caused her to have a great time. She was oh my gosh, I cannot wait to go see what Tiny Tom does next week. And that was the game that she wanted to play. And being as a game master, our game master was so flexible in that moment, and knowing that we needed to shift this from like sort of a like maybe dark themed game where we're killing Santa Claus to like a game with funny little British accent boy, you know, with a top hat.
So we have a little bit of time for questions. Important word there is question. If what you have is in fact a comment or an anecdote, it would be better saved for after the panel in a conversation. I saw this hand go up first, so.
Yeah, do you have advice in those aftercare sessions for modeling or guiding people to a place where they really feel comfortable being vulnerable about their feedback?
So just to repeat it for the audio, the question is in aftercare sessions, how do you help people feel okay about being vulnerable in giving feedback? Did I paraphrase that right?
I think one of the ways that I mentioned earlier is by making it normal. Doing it every single time everybody answers, and making it normal that everybody answers. And the way that I framed the request for maybe critical feedback was something challenging, then makes it a challenge by choice. So if they want to explain that challenge as something with what I did or with what another person did, they can choose to do that or not. And then they can sort of experience it, sort of building the comfort around speaking up around those things sort of has a natural progress. You could always also receive that information anonymously. There's like Google Forms you could use if you really are wanting to get the feedback but don't want to push too hard on somebody. There's a lot of ways to anonymously get that data as well.
Being very careful not to take it and internalize it and take it very personally, because you're creating this story and it's very hard not to take critical feedback personally. But also giving people various avenues to give you that feedback and not always sitting like at the table as soon as you're done. Because for a lot of people, especially if you had a very emotional or fraught session, the last thing I would do is sit there and kind of rehash things. What we do with Rivals is we go out to eat after most episodes. So we're relaxed, we're not sitting at the same table we just spent a couple hours at. Mm-hmm. And then we also have a Slack. We have other ways to communicate. We text each other, we do Twitter, whatever way there is to discuss things with that GM if we're not comfortable bringing it up. And like for me, there was an episode/session, which sounds weird, where there was a lot of being talked over. And it wasn't intentional because we've all known each other for a while. But it was like that really, it impacted me negatively. And it was kind of okay, so my character does this, but the human behind this character could not get a word in edgewise for whatever reason this time. And so that made me feel really devalued, and I didn't get to do basically much of anything I wanted to do. And I sat on it for a couple days because I know if I'd said something right after the session, it probably wouldn't have gone very well because I'm not always a nice level-headed person. And then like with DMing, I just kind of try to check in and go, was that okay? Especially like for the Dragon Age thing I'm gonna do, no one but me knows the lore and the canon. So I have to also remember that this is not my personal Idaho of Dragon Age running around, but it is trying to make a fun experience for other people. So being open and listening and not internalizing that feedback.
For me, it becomes a matter of asking, honestly, not for criticism, but for co-creative, so it becomes less about, what did I as the GM do wrong? And then that's a little startling sort of a spotlight to suddenly shine on somebody, and be more like, what are the aspects you would like to see us focus more on in the future, right? So that when the player is willing to give this feedback, they feel like they are assisting with the creation of this campaign, with the progress of this game, rather than necessarily criticizing your individual efforts. Because I have several players who would absolutely never speak up at the table if we did it, if we went around the table afterwards and that sort of thing. Which is why for my group, and I think being able and willing to read your group, to know where their comfort is valuable, which is why I've kind of evolved that whole checking in with what 1 or 2 people in the weeks in between games, just to kind of see where everybody's at and like, is there something you'd like to see more and that sort of thing.
Okay, I guess more questions back there. Yes.
You gave some examples at the end that were just a single new player. I'd like to hear more about that because I have a group that's experienced role players and then someone who's never gamed before and also kind of feels like she's not going to be any good at it and has expressed insecurity to me. And I want to know what I can do to get her into a group of experienced and loud people.
Okay, yeah, the question is, how do you include just a single new player as opposed to a whole new group of new players, especially when you're among a group of probably highly experienced players, and how that can kind of be scary for a new player?
So find the one player who is the most likely to try and tell other players what to do and ask them if they will play mentor. Give them someone to sit at the table and emphasize, when it comes to giving advice to this new player, this is the only person at the table who can do this. Because the single most like creating a sensation of dread is when the one new player suddenly is having all of these suggestions, even if they're all the same suggestion, telling them what to do at the table. That is absolutely terrifying. If they know that at any point during the game they can turn to someone who, in their perspective, they know the game, like they're a reliable resource if they have a rules question, and they can literally just lean over and whisper it and keep that sort of, so that they don't have to be really public effacing about what they do not know, it is an incredible boon to that player's comfort level.
I would also suggest you prep the rest of the players to make sure they know there's a new player coming in and set some sort of behavioral expectations around that, knowing that you want your table to be as inclusive as possible to new players, and let them know ahead of time, because I know that playing with new players sometimes when I'm a player can slow the game down a lot and can make the game less fun because the game is slower. We have to pause and look at rules or explain things. And if I can be prepared ahead of time, I know that I will then set my expectations that we're gonna move the story along probably less than we would otherwise. And when I know that, of course, I'm gonna be open-minded to bringing a new player in. I want more people to play the game. But I think the players, if they have the expectations set, like you just said, around not giving the advice too much, because if they want to move the game forward, I'm like, that's where your dice is right there. It's an E20, it's always an E20. That might be annoying and put that player off. And I think it's important that the other players are set up to be empowered, like deputized almost, to we are going to bring this person into our hobby. It's our job as ambassadors of this game.
I would say, even if possible, try to bring them in and have them sit in on a session so they can see kind of how other people gel first, and make sure these are people that they want to actually play a game with. Because if you do all of this and bring them in, they still may not gel with them, because the road to hell is paved with good intention. And just because you do everything you can in your power as a DM does not mean that that person is going to gel with an established group. And be prepared for that. And I know that's like a super downer answer, but I'm also being realistic. Because you can prep everything, and they may just observe these folks and go, I'm good, I'm okay, I'm just not gonna do this.
This depends a little bit on system, but whatever their character is really good at, make sure they get a chance to do it in their first session. They're a rogue who's invested in being really good at dealing with traps. Make sure there's a few of those for them to find and get rid of, and like, wow, you really saved the party from having that axe fall down from the ceiling on somebody, to let them be successful at things. Or if they're a really social character, make sure that there's some NPCs they can talk to and shine that way.
Okay, any more questions? Go right here.
So really easy question. Is there a system you recommend starting a new player off? Because I use Genesis for all of my campaigns, because me and you don't agree. But is there a system you recommend for new players to start them with?
So the question is there a recommended system a system we recommend to start new players with? I want to jump in there. A lot of systems nowadays have a quick start guide or a starter set, beginner set, and those are always great for getting new players in. They have things like pre-generated characters already ready for you to hand out. A lot of the adventures are written in a very video game tutorial kind of way, and some of those are even intended for people who have no GM to guide them. This will guide you through that whole process along the way, and I think those are always great to work with.
I would recommend Dungeon Worlds. It's very simple. I think it's just 3d6 for a Dungeon World. And also Dragon Age. It's 3d6. And despite what some people think, you don't have to know every bit of lore. It is just 3d6. One is a different color to do everything. And it's simple, you can have fun with it, and you can run around and just do whatever you want to do.
It's unfortunately kind of a cop-out answer, but it's really whatever game system you know well and are enthusiastic about. Because since they're going to be looking to you to kind of be the sort of like solid foundation of their experience, whatever you feel that you can, most easily enable that sort of introductory experience. So like, whatever game it is that you really enjoy, run with that one. Truthfully, I'll tell you, I've played Genesis and the predecessor Star Wars system before, and as a longtime gamer, I was of course very like, oh, those weird dice. I had opinions, boy. But sitting down with a handful of new folks who had never played anything before and handed them Star Wars pre-gens, I found that players who were not normally quick to engage with systems found it very fun to interpret the results of the dice, because it wasn't just a numerical pass or fail, right? There was some creative flexibility in that. And so run with what you know.
I've heard good things about Fate Accelerated. I've never actually played very much of it, but the book is small, which indicates to me that it's pretty simple. There's also a game that I've only recently come across. We're experimenting with maybe using it in hospital groups that we might start running, called Weave. And Weave is largely digital, and you sort of take pictures of cards that then lets you, through a mobile app, make limited selections on your character creation and what happens in the game. You still roll some dice. You roll 6 dice, I think, or 3 dice, and then you add more dice if you're good at it. But there's no real math. It's just like you have to get 3 of the face that you want. They're not even numbered dice. And that might be also, if someone is averse to maybe, or concerned about doing math, doesn't sound like a fun activity for them. Now it's just counting shapes. And that might be another good one to look at. It's called Weave.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Oh.
Sorry, I think your hand was up first.
I'm a new GM, and I'm running all new players member RPG. We're using Fate Accelerated. A little nuts and bolts question: are there good setups or schemes to help all the characters get together and help the players start to do role playing?
So to repeat the question, new GM and new players playing Fate Accelerated, and what are some good setup scenes to get everybody kind of in the game together and encourage role play?
So I will tell you, for all of my campaigns these days, unless for some reason the story itself specifically calls for otherwise, I make part of session 0, which we were talking about earlier, which is you get together, you kind of talk about the assumptions of the upcoming game. Part of what the players do during that is determine how they know one another. So rather than start with the stumbly, halty, like introducing them to one another in play, figure out how it is that they know one another. And there's a really fun tool that's actually originally for Fate. They're called backstory cards. You can get these on Drive-Thru-RPG. And they're literally just a deck of cards that you draw it, and it asks a question. And then you draw another one to determine who the sort of other player is. And they're questions like, well, when you and other PC went up against organization, and the GM generally fills in has a list of a couple of organizations, what did each of you give up and what was the outcome? And then you have two players who are kind of talking about, and so these cards very naturally create these backstory connections between players that are tremendously fun.
Have you ever tried starting a game at a tavern? There's actually a lot of games that have that kind of mechanic built in. I think Dungeon World has it too, I think. Or one of the Dungeon World games has a similar thing where you can choose a relationship between you and the person on your left, and it's really best when it's done collaboratively. So I could say something like, my character and Tanya's character both are members of a secret organization, and then Tanya has to agree to that and then say yes, and the secret organization was.
Right.
So then we're collaborating, we're building up our both human connection and our characters' connections, and the game master can then say, well, you got a summons from that secret organization of abyssal chicken farmers, or whatever the case is. One of the things I actually picked up from a panel that I went to, it was a game master panel, I think it was a PAX, and their idea, which I've stolen several times now, is you make up an NPC as a group, and then every person names something about how they know that NPC. Maybe they were my music teacher, or they taught me how to use my sword, or whatever the case is. It's all yes-anding, because the story starts at that person's funeral. And you're at that person's funeral, you're all there, you don't really know each other, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Yeah. But you're at the funeral, this is we're bringing in some emotional content here, and then somebody attacks the funeral, and now you have to defend the people, maybe the widow, the widower, whatever, and then now the team is bonded together over a mutual enemy, because somebody wanted to attack this funeral, this person who's my music teacher, and now we want to join together. So finding an excuse to give them a bond right away. I mentioned, I do use a tavern start, to be super stereotypical. It's a soup tavern, because we don't have alcohol in our games. But that NPC that they all love from the beginning, who is the one who says, where'd you get your sword? That's so cool. I like your neat knapsack you have there. He gets attacked. And oftentimes he's stabbed with a magical dagger that puts him into a coma. And now they have to save him, and they have to go attack the person that stabbed him, and now my group of socially set back, for whatever reason, young people are on a team, and they're gonna go get that guy in black armor who stabbed our friend, right? So you can find ways to force them a little bit by stabbing them. Game master trick, the knife, right?
The murder knife.
Yeah.
He may be an annoying soup man, but he's our annoying
That's right.
soup man.
I had a gnome bard by the name of Mordnap Nimbletoes that they all love to hate. So even having an NPC that they love to hate, who's an NPC who's on their side, is a good trick to get them all aligned.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I think that's all the time we have. Thank y'all.
We should do one last who we were and where you can find us on the internet.
Oh yes, that's true. Again, Luis Loza, I'm a developer at Paizo. I guess you can follow me on Twitter at Donato Classic, or you can come up and I'll give you a business card. Those are fun to give away.
I'm Kate Baker. I'm on Twitter at KateBakerGM.
I'm Joseph Carriker. I'm on Twitter at Oakthorn.
I'm Adam Davis. I'm on Twitter at Sparks for Sharks. You can also follow Game to Grow at Game to Grow.
Game to Grow TO?
Game TO Grow, not game number 2.
Okay.
I just did this when I said TO, so it's really confusing.
Not that at all.
TO Grow.
You just messed it all up. And I'm Tanya DePass, Cypher Tier, CYPHEROFTYR. You can also tweet at me as OrcaCon this weekend, SAS guaranteed. Or I Need Diverse Games, which is I Need DIVGMS, because it's too long for a Twitter handle.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great con.